The room was silent, except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan, turning lazily above her head. Dust motes drifted through a shaft of sunlight that cut through a cracked window. Her wrists were bound with coarse nylon cord, her breathing shallow, eyes fixed on the cold steel of the pistol pressing against her temple. The man holding it trembled, not from fear, but from arrogance, the kind that comes from never realizing what kind of storm you've just stepped into. He didn't know who she was. None of them did. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Hale, retired Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient, former hostage rescue operative. To the world, she was just a quiet woman running a humanitarian convoy in a lawless corner of the world. To them, she looked like a prize, an American woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what they saw as prey was, in truth, the last person on earth they should have threatened. The leader barked orders in a dialect she half understood. 3 men circled her, their boots scraping against the tiled floor, each movement clumsy and unpredictable. One of them laughed as he checked the magazine of his rifle. Another paced near the window, keeping watch for a rescue that would never come. They thought the silence in her eyes was fear. They didn't know it was calculation. In that silence, Sarah's mind wasn't in the room. It was years back. On the deck of a carrier in the Arabian Sea, the salt wind biting her face as her commanding officer's voice echoed. "You're not trained to panic, you're trained to end it." She could still feel the weight of her rifle, the taste of grit and sweat, the pulse of adrenaline that once carried her through the kind of darkness these men couldn't imagine. The man pressed the barrel harder against her skull. "You think someone will come for you?" he sneered. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence unnerved him more than any scream could. Outside, the horizon shimmered with heat. The convoy trucks lay smoldering, their cargo of medical supplies turned to ash. The world had collapsed into smoke and ruin, but her heartbeat was steady, cold, deliberate. Every second, every breath, she measured distances. The angle of the gun, the placement of his feet, the way his hand twitched on the trigger. She could see his reflection in the cracked glass. He was nervous. That was the first mistake. The second was assuming she was helpless. Sarah's thoughts moved like a machine wired for survival. Her right thumb flexed just enough to test the cord, too tight. But the knot was imperfect. Whoever tied it was sloppy, distracted. Probably proud of himself for capturing a woman, not realizing he'd just built his own coffin. Then the world outside erupted, a distant explosion. Not close enough to kill, but close enough to shake dust from the rafters. The men flinched, instinctively turning toward the noise. Sarah didn't. Her eyes stayed on the leader. She could smell his sweat now, sharp and metallic. She waited for the breath before he spoke again, and in that breath she moved. A twist of her wrist, a drop of her shoulder. A precise talk learned from 1,000 hours of training. The cord snapped against the edge of the chair's steel frame. Before his brain registered the motion, she had the pistol, 3 shots. No hesitation, each one deliberate. The room fell silent again, except for the sound of her breath. Steady, centered, calm. Smoke curled in the air. The leader dropped before he even saw the look in her eyes. Outside, chaos. The remaining captors scrambled for cover, shouting orders, dragging weapons from the dirt. Sarah crouched low, picked up a fallen rifle, and moved like a ghost through the doorway. The compound was a ruin. Bullet holes pocked the walls, the air thick with dust and diesel fumes. She darted between broken walls, every movement an echo of muscle memory. She wasn't fighting for glory now. She was fighting for survival and for the people these men had taken. 2 turns down a narrow alley, she found them. The convoy team. 6 men, 2 women, bound, bruised, terrified. One of them saw her and whispered her name like a prayer. "Stay low," she mouthed, cutting through their bindings with the broken edge of her knife. "Are you?" One started. "Later," she said. "We move on my mark." There was no need to explain. They trusted her instantly, the way you trust someone whose calm feels impossible in the middle of death. She peeked around the corner. 2 guards at the main gate, both armed, both distracted by the smoke plume rising from the direction of the explosion. She could use that. Timing wasn't luck. It was awareness sharpened to a blade. Sarah waited for the lull, that half second between a man breathing out and realizing he's being watched. Then fired 2 clean shots. They dropped soundlessly. The group moved fast, crawling through rubble toward the outer perimeter. Every breath tasted like sand and gunpowder. In the distance, faint sirens, local militia responding, or maybe just more trouble coming. But then came the sound she'd been waiting for, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades, faint at first, then rising, her extraction. The captives looked up, disbelief in their eyes. They came. One whispered. Sarah smiled, but there was no joy in it. Just purpose. They always come. As they neared the clearing, gunfire erupted from the rooftops. The air filled with dust and screaming bullets. Sarah turned. Firing controlled bursts, every shot disciplined, precise. She didn't waste a single round. She didn't miss. A bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her sideways, but she didn't flinch. Pain was just information. She kept moving, pushing the others toward the rising roar of the chopper. One of the rescued men stumbled. She caught him, shoved him forward. Move. He hesitated, tears in his eyes. What about you? She gave him a look that said everything. If I don't make it, you damn well better. Then she turned back toward the fight. The last of the captors had regrouped, using the ruins as cover. Their leader, the one who'd survived the first volley, staggered from the smoke, fury in his eyes. He shouted something guttural and raised his rifle. Sarah was faster. One shot, center mass. He collapsed, disbelief frozen on his face, the moment he realized who he'd tried to break. The helicopter descended, rotor wash blasting debris through the clearing. Sarah guided the others aboard, then turned one last time toward the burning compound. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the place that had been her cage dissolve into smoke. And then, only then, did she let herself breathe. Inside the helicopter, one of the medics tried to dress her shoulder. She waved him off. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, the red sun sinking over a landscape scarred by violence and dust. You should rest, he said softly. She shook her head. Not yet, because rest was for people who didn't remember every face they couldn't save, for people who didn't live with ghosts. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Base secured. We're taking you home, Commander. She didn't answer right away. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and for a fleeting second, she looked less like a soldier and more like a survivor caught between worlds, the one she'd fought for and the one that never let her leave. Below them, the compound was just a smudge of fire on the darkening earth. One of the rescued women, still trembling, whispered, "How did you do that? How could you stay calm?" Sarah turned to her, eyes like steel softened by compassion. "Because," she said quietly, "panic doesn't save lives, people do." The helicopter banked north, carrying them toward the faint glow of the base on the horizon. The night swallowed the wreckage behind them. But Sarah knew, somewhere out there, another convoy would go missing, another line would be crossed, another threat would rise, and when it did, she'd be ready. Not because she wanted to fight again, but because someone had to. Because peace, she knew, wasn't the absence of war. It was the courage to walk through it and not lose your soul. And that was what they never understood. The men who pressed guns to heads, who thought fear was power. They never learned that some people have already met death and made peace with it. And when you threaten someone like that, someone who has already seen the worst the world can offer, you don't scare them, you wake them up. And when Sarah Hale woke up, the world remembered why you never ever threaten a Navy SEAL. The helicopter's rotors faded into the distance, swallowed by the open desert sky. Beneath the soft thrum of the engines, the air felt almost peaceful again, too peaceful for what it had just endured. But peace, Sarah knew, was an illusion that came between battles, not after them. As she stared through the open side door, the horizon stretched endlessly. Dunes like ocean waves, the sun sinking behind them in a slow golden descent. The others sat quietly around her, some staring at their hands, others lost in silent tears. None of them spoke to her. They didn't need to. Her silence was enough. The medic finally approached again, more hesitant this time. "You're bleeding," he said, reaching toward her shoulder. She didn't resist, but her eyes never left the horizon. The pain was distant, unimportant. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere far from the roar of engines and the warmth of safety. In her head, she was back in another desert, years ago. A night that had turned the world inside out. The memory came uninvited, the mission that had written her name into whispers and scars. Operation Manticore, a covert rescue in a nameless province buried deep under layers of classified reports. She had been younger then, more human perhaps. She still believed in right and wrong. Before the world taught her that in war, the difference is measured only by who walks away. The memory came in fragments. The cold gleam of moonlight on sand, the static of a radio whispering orders, the heartbeat of anticipation just before the first breach. They'd gone in under darkness, 5 of them against 20 insurgents. It was supposed to be a clean mission. It never was. She could still see the faces of her team. Parker, Mendoza, Ellis. Brothers and sisters forged in fire, laughter buried beneath exhaustion. She could still feel the warmth of Parker's hand gripping her shoulder that night, steady and sure. "See you on the other side," he'd said, but she didn't. Because when the detonation went wrong, when the entire southern wall erupted into chaos, she was too far to save him. She'd watched him fall through the smoke, shouting his name until her throat tore. But the radio was dead, and the night swallowed him whole. The mission was called a success. The hostages were rescued, the medals were pinned. And yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same thing. The flash of light, the body dropping into darkness, the echo of silence that came after. That was when she learned the truth, the one no medal could disguise. Saving others didn't erase the ones you couldn't. It only made you carry them longer. The helicopter jolted slightly as it banked toward the base. The desert below was turning silver under the rising moon. Sarah's jaw tightened. She hated flying after mission. The noise gave her too much time to think. The rescued convoy workers were asleep now, exhaustion finally winning. One of them murmured in their dreams, her name, maybe, or a prayer. She wished she could tell them it wasn't bravery that kept her calm back there. It was something colder. Something that came from years of losing the right to fear. The pilot's voice crackled again. "Eat her 5 minutes." She nodded without answering. To listen, to wait. When they landed, the base was lit with harsh white floodlights that washed everything in a sterile glow. Men in fatigues ran toward the chopper, shouting orders, guiding stretchers, waving medic. Dust swirled around the landing pad, catching in the air like ghosts of everything left behind. Sarah stepped down last. Her boots touched the ground with the finality of someone returning from a world the living couldn't understand. A colonel met her halfway, tall, tired, carrying the clipped posture of command. He saluted. "Commander Hale," he said. "Hell of a job," she nodded. "We lost 3 trucks, 2 drivers. The convoy's compromised. But you're alive, you saved 8 people. That's what matters." Her eyes flicked to his. There was no pride there, only fatigue. "Is it?" He hesitated. "For them, yes." She didn't answer. Her gaze drifted past him to the medics tending to the rescued. Their faces, hollow, trembling, grateful, should have given her peace. Instead, they felt like reminders. The colonel studied her, sensing the distance in her expression. You've been doing this too long, Hale," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time you stopped." She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know better than that, sir," he sighed. "You always say that, because it's always true." Later that night, when the base fell silent and the floodlights dimmed, Sarah sat alone outside her tent. The desert wind moved like breath over the sand, carrying the faint scent of fuel and iron. She pulled a flask from her jacket and took a slow sip. The stars above were impossibly bright, cruel in their stillness. Every mission left a different kind of silence. Some were heavy. Others felt hollow. Tonight's was both. She reached into her pocket and took out a small piece of metal, a dog tag, edges worn smooth from years of being touched. Parker D. The letters had faded, but she didn't need to read them. She whispered his name once, not like a prayer, but like a promise. Then she heard it, a faint rustle from the edge of the perimeter fence, too deliberate for wind, too slow for an animal. Sarah froze, her instincts instantly awake. The base was supposed to be secure. But safety was a lie she'd stopped believing in long ago. She rose silently, her body moving before her mind caught up. Every muscle remembered what to do. She moved toward the sound, steps soft against the sand. The moonlight carved silver edges into the world, shadows long and sharp. Her hand found the knife at her thigh, another rustle. Then silence. She crouched near a stack of crates, breath slow, steady. Her pulse didn't race, it counted. Then she saw it, a glint of metal, the briefest reflection from behind a fuel drum. Someone was there, watching. Sarah didn't call for backup. She didn't need to. She approached with the same quiet precision that had kept her alive for years. When she rounded the corner, the shape lunged. She caught the arm mid-swing, twisted, forced it down. A knife clattered to the ground. The man grunted, tried to pull away, but her strength was coiled and efficient. In seconds, he was face first in the dirt, her knee pressed against his spine. "Who sent you?" she hissed. The man struggled, sand spilling from his mouth. His accent was thick, his voice panicked. "You don't know what you've done," he gasped. Her grip tightened. "I know exactly what I've done." He turned his head enough for her to see his eyes. Terrified but defiant. "You think it's over, it isn't? You killed the wrong man." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Sarah froze. For the first time that night, her breath caught. She looked down at him, at the stranger who'd broken into a military base to tell her she'd made a mistake. "What did you say?" he coughed, choking on sand. "The man you shot, he wasn't the leader. He was the decoy, the real one. He's coming for you." And then, before she could press for more, the man bit down hard, a cyanide capsule cracking between his teeth. His body convulsed, eyes rolling back, foam at his lips. Sarah dropped him, stepping back, her pulse finally spiking. For a long time, she didn't move. The desert wind howled through the fence, carrying the faint metallic smell of death. She looked up at the horizon again, the same horizon she'd watched from the helicopter. Only now it felt different. Somewhere out there, beyond that line of sand and shadow, someone was still alive. Someone she thought she'd killed, someone watching. And as the stars flickered cold above her, Sarah Hale finally understood. Her mission wasn't over, it had just begun. The morning after the intruder's death, the base moved like a hive disturbed. Soldiers combed the perimeter, tracks disappearing into endless sand. Reports were written. Radios buzzed with encrypted chatter. But no one could explain how a man with a knife had crossed 2 kilometers of defended ground unseen. Sarah didn't join the chaos. She stood at the fence line where he had died. The sand darkened in patches where his blood had dried overnight. The wind erased his footprints, as if the desert itself refused to remember. She crouched and picked up the knife he had dropped. Military grade, American made. Not local. That detail twisted something cold inside her. Whoever sent him knew exactly where to find her, and they weren't guessing. When she returned to the command tent, the colonel was waiting, jaw tight. "You want to tell me why I've got a corpse outside my wire?" Sarah dropped the knife onto the desk between them. "Because someone's cleaning up unfinished business." His expression darkened. "You think this has to do with yesterday's op?" "I don't think," she said evenly. "I know." He leaned forward. "You already told me their leader was neutralized." "So did the man who tried to kill me," she replied. For a long moment, the colonel said nothing. Then he sighed and rubbed his temple. "All right, Commander. Say you're right. What do you want to do about it?" Sarah's eyes were cold steel. "I'm going to find him before he finds me." The colonel studied her. "You're not on active duty anymore." "I wasn't yesterday either," she said. "Didn't stop me then." He wanted to argue, but something in her tone silenced him. That unflinching certainty, the quiet defiance that made even battle-hardened men step back. He knew that look. It belonged to someone who'd already accepted death once and found it unimpressive. He exhaled heavily. "Fine. You've got 48 hours. I'll have Intel pull the convoy logs, see who might have slipped through the cracks." Sarah nodded, turned to leave. "Commander," he called after her, "whatever you're walking into, be careful." She paused at the tent's flap. Careful doesn't get the job done. Outside, the heat was already punishing. The desert shimmered with mirages, the horizon bending under the weight of the sun. She grabbed her pack, rifle and sidearm, moving with silent precision through the base. No one stopped her. They knew better. 2 hours later, she was gone. By nightfall, Sarah was in the city, a place where order dissolved into noise and neon. The streets were narrow and alive, filled with markets that never slept, engines that coughed smoke, and people who looked away too quickly. She moved through it like a ghost, hood drawn, eyes scanning reflections in every window she passed. She had always preferred silence, but this kind of silence, the one that comes from being hunted, had a different weight. The name she had pried from the colonel's files repeated in her mind. Rahim Darren, former militia commander, disappeared 2 years ago after a drone strike on his compound. Presumed dead. He wasn't. Now he wanted her to know it. The knife wasn't a message. It was an invitation. She reached a safe house near the industrial district, a decaying apartment where the electricity hummed like an old animal. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, the air thick with humidity. She placed her rifle on the table, disassembled it with mechanical precision. Every click of metal was a heartbeat. On the wall opposite her hung a single map. Northern routes out of the desert, through mountains, toward the border. Red lines traced her last known mission coordinates. Somewhere along that route, Darren had survived. Sarah leaned back, studying it in silence. She knew men like him, self-made warlords who wore vengeance like armor. He'd watched her dismantle his network, his men, his empire. And men like that didn't forgive. They rebuilt. Her instincts told her he wasn't coming straight for her. Not yet. He'd go after what mattered most, the people she'd saved. That thought struck deeper than she expected. She could still see their faces. The terrified civilians from the convoy, their shaking hands gripping hers as she cut their bonds. She'd promised them safety, and now her past might be coming to collect them. Sarah rose, strapped her gear, and left the room before the thought could finish forming. By dawn, she reached the outskirts of the refugee camp where the rescued convoy survivors had been relocated. Rows of canvas tents shimmered in the heat, children darting between them with the unguarded laughter of those too young to understand danger. The camp's director, a tired man with kind eyes, recognized her immediately. "Commander Hale," he said, startled. "We didn't expect you back so soon." "I'm not staying," she said. "I need to see them, the convoy team." He hesitated. "They've been through enough. What's this about?" Someone might be coming for them. That was all it took. His face went pale. He led her through the maze of tents, the smell of dust and kerosene thick in the air. She found the survivors gathered under a makeshift canopy, eating in silence. When they saw her, their expressions shifted. Relief, confusion, fear. "What's happening?" one asked. "Pack what you can carry," she said. "You need to move." Now, they stared at her, not comprehending. "Is it them?" whispered the youngest, a medic with wide eyes who had clung to Sarah during the escape. "It's worse," Sarah said softly. "It's who they answer to." That was when the first shot rang out. A crack like lightning tore through the morning air. The camp erupted in screams. Dust exploded from the ground beside her boot. She spun, instinct taking over. "Sniper! High elevation! East Ridge! Down!" she shouted, dragging the medic behind a supply truck. The others followed, panic scattering them into chaos. A second shot whistled past, shattering a water barrel. The camp dissolved into noise and terror, shouting, crying, the metallic echo of gunfire in the distance. Sarah's eyes tracked the glint of a scope half a mile out. She drew her rifle, adjusted the sight and breathed once. One heartbeat, one pull. The shooter dropped. But even before he hit the sand, she knew this wasn't the end. Snipers didn't move alone. A convoy of black trucks appeared on the horizon, dust trails rising behind them like storm clouds. Her blood ran cold. They were coming. And this time, it wasn't a rescue. She turned to the camp director, shouting over the rising panic. "Get them out the west gate. Take the canyon road. What about you? I'll hold them off." He hesitated, terrified. "That's suicide." She chambered around, eyes like tempered glass. "Not if they die first. Not if they die first." She moved toward the ridge as the first trucks breached the perimeter, machine guns mounted and roaring. The camp became a battlefield, tents shredded, smoke and dust swallowing the sky. Sarah dove for cover behind a supply crate, firing controlled bursts. Every round found its mark. Bodies fell in the sand, but more kept coming. She felt the burn of grit on her skin, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. The world shrank to the space between breaths. A grenade rolled near her boot. She kicked it back. The explosion tore through the air, throwing debris and bodies skyward. Still, she kept firing. When the smoke thinned, she saw him, standing by the lead truck, tall, scarred eyes burning, with something that wasn't rage but satisfaction. Raheem Darren alive. Their eyes met across the chaos, and the world seemed to pause. Two ghosts recognizing each other in the inferno. He smiled, a small knowing smile that said you thought it was over. Sarah didn't blink, her rifle rose, her fingers steady. But he turned and vanished into the smoke before she could pull the trigger. And in that moment, as the camp burned and the rescued fled into the canyon, Sarah Hale knew the truth. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was a reckoning. And it wouldn't end until one of them stopped breathing. The desert still burned behind her. The smoke from the refugee camp curled into the horizon like a scar that refused to fade. Sarah Hale didn't look back. She couldn't. The faces of the dead would only follow her, and she needed her mind sharp, her heart locked. The sand crunched under her boots as she crossed into no man's land. Her wounded arm throbbed beneath layers of gauze, but she didn't slow down. Pain was familiar. Pain was steady. It kept her alive. For 3 days she moved through the wasteland, sleeping in abandoned huts, eating cold rations, and studying the routes ahead. She knew Raheem Darren wasn't dead. Men like him never died easily. And if he was rebuilding, then someone, somewhere, was helping him. At sunset on the 4th day, she found a smuggler boy who agreed to take her north in the back of a rusted truck. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, but his eyes carried a lifetime of war. "You shouldn't go there," he said quietly, as the truck bounced over the rocks. "People who hunt Darren don't come back." Sarah stared out the window, the sky bleeding red into darkness. "Neither did the people he killed," she said. The boy said nothing more. Hours later, when the engine sputtered to a stop near the border, she paid him and stepped out. The wind was sharp and cold. Without another word, she disappeared into the night, a shadow returning to the war that never ended. The city of Carson smelled of salt and oil, a place where secrets sold faster than bread. Sarah walked through narrow alleys, where neon signs flickered over rusted doors. She found the man she was looking for inside a bar that reeked of smoke and desperation. Iskander was once a handler for American intelligence. Now he was just another ghost, hiding from the mistakes of his past. His hands trembled as he poured himself another drink. "You're supposed to be dead," he muttered. "Not yet," she said. "Where's Darren?" he laughed, bitter and broken. "You really don't stop, do you? He's not just a man anymore, Hale. He's built something, the Ghost Network." Her eyes narrowed. "What is it?" "A private army," he whispered. "Ex-contractors, rogue intel officers, mercenaries, all working under the radar. Governments use them when they need blood without fingerprints." "And Darren?" "He's at the top of it now." Sarah leaned closer, her voice calm but sharp. "Where is he?" Iskander's eyes darted toward the window. "Last I heard, Istanbul. But going after him there, you won't survive." She stood up, sliding a folded bill across the table. "Then I'll make sure he doesn't either." Iskander watched her walk away, shaking his head. "You'll never find peace, Commander." Without turning, she said softly, "Peace isn't what I'm after." Istanbul glittered beneath a sky heavy with rain. The city breathed in shadows, the hum of traffic, the gleam of wet cobblestone, the quiet pulse of danger beneath beauty. Sarah walked through it unnoticed, her hair shorter now, her face hidden behind dark glasses. She met her next contact under the skeletal frame of an old shipyard crane. Rain cascaded down in sheets. A man stood waiting, Victor, a weapons broker with eyes like a snake. "You're late," he said. "You're lucky I came at all," she replied. He smirked. "You want Darren's location. It'll cost you more than money." She dropped a duffel bag at his feet. "Try me." He bent to unzip it, and in that instant, She drew her pistol and shot him clean through the leg. He screamed, collapsing in the mud. You're insane. Talk, she said, her tone flat. Where is he? He hesitated only for a moment. Then the words came spilling out. Coordinates, safe houses, supply routes, encrypted channels, everything she needed. When he finished, she turned and walked away, leaving him bleeding in the rain. By the time she reached her hideout, the pieces had come together. Darren's new base was operating out of a private airfield just outside the city, funded by an American defense contractor. That single detail hit her harder than a bullet. Someone on her own side had been keeping him alive. Before dawn, she broke into the contractor's Istanbul office. The hallways were silent, the air cool and metallic. Rows of servers blinked like mechanical eyes. She plugged in her drive and copied everything. Transactions, mission briefs, encrypted signatures. When the files decrypted, the truth flashed across the screen like a slap. Raheem Darren's network wasn't rogue. It was sanctioned, financed, protected, and the man behind it was someone she once saluted. A sound broke the silence, the sharp click of a pistol's safety. Hands where I can see them, Commander Hale. She turned slowly. The voice was American, familiar. Commander Briggs, her former superior. He looked older, colder, a man hollowed out by compromises. Briggs, she said, so it's true. He sighed, weapon steady. You weren't supposed to see this. The Ghost Network maintains balance, plausible deniability. You understand that better than anyone. Balance, she repeated. You call funding terrorists balance. His expression hardened. You think the world stays stable through honesty? We use monsters to control bigger ones. Sarah stared at him, eyes burning cold. You used me, you used all of us. He took a step closer. You're obsolete, Hale. You can't exist in peacetime. That's why you'll never stop fighting, because peace doesn't need killers. She raised her weapon, voice quiet. Then it's a good thing I'm not fighting for peace. Her finger tightened. One shot. Briggs fell. Sir. No scream, no struggle. Just the dull thud of betrayal hitting the floor. For a long moment, Sarah stood over him, her breath trembling in the silence. The lights above flickered, and his blood pooled beneath her boots. There was no victory in it, only the familiar emptiness of survival. She picked up the drives, tucked them into her jacket, and disappeared into the breaking dawn. By the time the sun rose over the Bosporus, Sarah Hale was gone. Her name was already flagged across global channels. Rogue operative, armed and dangerous, but she didn't care. The files she carried contained one last coordinate. Deep in Eastern Europe, near an abandoned Soviet base, the origin of the Ghost Network, the place where Raheem Darren was rebuilding his empire. She loaded her rifle, zipped her bag, and looked at the map one last time. This ends where it started, she whispered. Then she walked into the storm. Alone, silent, unstoppable. Snow was falling over the ruins of the old Soviet base. The air was thin, biting, alive with the quiet hum of distant generators. Searchlights swept across the jagged walls, painting streaks of white over rusted metal and barbed wire. Sarah Hale crouched on a ridge above the compound, her breath forming pale clouds in the darkness. She had been tracking him for weeks, crossing borders, dodging satellite scans, and ghosting through every trap his men had laid. And now, finally, the coordinates matched. Raheem Darren was here. Through the scope of her rifle, she could see him, standing near a helicopter, surrounded by armed guards. His face was older, scarred, but unmistakable. The man who'd once ordered the deaths of her team, the man who'd smiled while she bled. Her finger brushed the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. She needed answers, closure. A bullet couldn't give her that. The wind shifted, whispering through broken windows and shattered steel. She slid down the hill, silent as falling ash, weaving between dead machinery and skeletal watchtowers. Inside the compound, shadows moved like nervous ghosts. Mercenaries, trained, disciplined, but unaware of the predator already among them. Sarah slipped behind one, her knife flashing once, clean and quiet. Another guard went down near the fuel drums, his radio silenced before it could crackle. One by one, the fortress began to suffocate under its own silence. By the time she reached the main hangar, only 3 guards remained. She took cover behind a concrete pillar, heartbeat steady, eyes calculating every angle. When one of them turned his back, she moved. 2 suppressed shots, 2 bodies down. The third tried to run, but she was faster. Her boot struck his chest, her elbow cracked his jaw, and he crumpled soundlessly to the floor. She stepped over him and entered the hangar, and there he was. Rahim Darren stood near a table, covered in blueprints and weapon crates, his coat draped in shadow. The years had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes still burned with that same cruel intelligence. "I was wondering when the ghost would arrive," he said without turning. Sarah didn't respond. She raised her weapon, steady and deliberate. He turned slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You really are hard to kill. You made me that way," she said. He laughed softly. "You flatter yourself, Commander. You think you're the only monster they created? We're all products of the same machine. You killed civilians," she said, her voice low. "You turned missions into massacres." He tilted his head. "And who sent me there? Who signed the orders? Don't pretend your flag is cleaner than mine." For a moment, the hangar felt smaller, the air heavy with years of buried truths. Sarah's finger twitched on the trigger, but her thoughts tangled with ghosts of commands, briefings, and oaths sworn in blind faith. "You could have walked away," she said quietly. "So could you," he replied. "But you didn't. Because deep down you need this, the hunt, the war, the chaos. Peace terrifies you, doesn't it?" Sarah took a step closer. "Peace doesn't scare me. Men like you do." Darren's expression softened, almost pitying. "Then end it, Commander. Be the hero they made you believe you were." Just, he spread his arms, defiant, daring her to shoot. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Snow drifted through the broken roof, flakes melting on cold steel. The sound of the wind filled the silence like a ticking clock. Then Sarah lowered the rifle. "No," she said quietly. "Heroes kill for causes. I'm not a hero anymore." Darren's eyes flicked with confusion, just long enough. She stepped forward, grabbed his collar, and drove the barrel of her pistol beneath his chin. "This isn't execution," she whispered. "This is balance." His last words were a whisper, half amusement, half fear. "Then do it, Ghost." One shot, sharp, final. His body fell like a shadow collapsing. The echo rolled through the hangar, and then silence. Sarah stood over him, her breath steady, her eyes empty. There was no victory, no relief, just the quiet hum of the generator and the faint hiss of snow melting on warm metal. She holstered her weapon and looked at the blueprints on the table. They showed maps of global networks, trade routes, and encrypted symbols linking back to military divisions she once worked for. He was right. The machine had never stopped. It had only changed faces. Her radio buzzed softly, a voice she hadn't heard in months. "Commander Hale, do you copy?" "We tracked your signal. You're off mission. Stand down." She stared at the device. Her reflection warped in the cracked glass. Then she dropped it to the floor and crushed it under her boot. Outside, the helicopter stood waiting, its fuel tanks full, its blades glinting in the pale dawn. She climbed in, started the engine, and lifted off. From above, the fortress looked small, a graveyard of steel and secrets. Flames began to spread where stray bullets had hit fuel lines, devouring the place where monsters were made. The wind screamed through the cabin. The sky opened into light. The sky opened into light. Sarah looked down one last time. "It's over," she whispered. "No more ghosts." Hours later, deep over neutral territory, she switched off the transponder and vanished from every radar in the hemisphere. No one ever found her again. Some say she died in the mountains. Others whisper that she still operates from the shadows, dismantling the same machine that built her, one secret at a time. But those who met her once, those who saw the calm in her eyes while death stood inches away, they remember the silence. They remember the lesson. You don't threaten a Navy SEAL, because the moment you do, you've already lost.